So my project is done on ligament tears of the ulnar collateral ligament. I did this case study on tears of pitchers in both youth pitching and the MLB. All right, so for this assignment, I chose two articles. One of my articles is called The Relationship Between Pitching Mechanics and Injury. And then the second article I have is called Preventing Tommy John Surgery. The first article that I chose is based on the pitching mechanics, so everything biomechanics wise, going from the feet all the way up to the shoulder. So it's dependent on the feet, the hips, the spine, the elbow, the shoulder, going all the way up into the hand and then through the ball. And then the second article that I have is a study based on trends in pitch selection of pitchers, mostly in the MLB. So they look at pitch selection, which pitches they throw, how many times they're throwing it, and then the velocity and then the spin rate of those pitches. Okay, so like I said, the first article I did is a study on the mechanics of pitchers. So I was looking for a few things like shoulder rotation, hip rotation, elbow valgus, shoulder internal and external rotation, and knee flexion. Like I said, it's looking for differences of those, so differences in a healthy pitcher and an unhealthy pitcher, or looking for the differences when a pitcher is healthy, and then looking for those last couple games to leading up to their injury. This is a study done on 476 youth pitchers and 23 professional pitchers. Some of the youth pitchers, 172 of them, had motion analysis done, and then every professional pitcher had motion analysis done on them. So this article, like I said, goes over mechanics in pitchers. I'm going to start with the ideal mechanics. So the ideal mechanics in a pitcher is typically what you would see with a healthy pitcher that has a healthy arm. It's split into both an upper body focus and then a lower body focus. So if you look at the upper body focus, there's three things that they're looking at. If you look on the graphic, there's point A, which is elbow valgus, point B, which is shoulder rotation, typically external rotation, and then it'll be internal rotation on the front side. And then C is hand velocity or velocity of the ball. So typically when you see an injured pitcher, it's because they have a high velocity in these areas, particularly in point A with elbow valgus, or they have bad shoulder external rotation, which you see in point B. And then the lower body focus, there's no drawings on the diagram, but you'll see if you look at the front leg where it loads into the ground, you'll see a big knee flexion right there. Typically you'll see in an injured pitcher, they won't have as much knee flexion as they should. So you'll see the knee flexion, and then you also see the hips turn toward wherever the target is of where the pitcher's going. In an injured athlete, you'll see a lot of times that hip won't rotate as soon as it needs to. Sometimes it'll be turned back. But if they do this right, ideally, you'll have knee flexion at the point of contact of the foot, and then that hip will be facing toward the pitcher or towards the catcher. Okay, so what the study found was that in elbow valgus torque and shoulder maximal external rotational torque, the velocity of these movements are what leads to injury. So if you have good mechanics, the velocity should be okay, but when the mechanics start to get bad, or the velocity of those mechanics start to get too high, that's when you'll start to see that injury. Also, going into the lower body mechanics, a lot of times when you don't see knee flexion at the foot strike, that can lead to injury, because when the knee flexes at strike, that's when the force gets absorbed going down from the ground all the way up into the body and then into the ball. Also, if you're late rotating your trunk or your pelvic area, that can also lead to injury. If you're late rotating that trunk area, that can put excessive stress on your elbow and your shoulder, which can also lead to that injury. A couple other factors that they saw was elbow flexion at release. So some pitchers are a little more higher up versus have a little bit more of a lower slot, which is that elbow flexion, and then shoulder rotation. Another factor which isn't biomechanical but is also a big part of the injury is found to be in fatigue. Depending on how often the pitcher pitches or how many pitches he threw during his last outing or his last couple outings going into this next start, that paired with the velocity can lead into injury. Okay, so the next article that I have is titled Preventing Tommy John Surgery. This is a study that was done on MLB pitchers, which tracks their pitches leading up to the injury. This is a big focus on each pitch that they throw, how many times did they throw it, the average velocity of each pitch, and the spin rate of each pitch. This was done on 223 pitchers, all of which tore their UCL in the years 2009 to 2019. And the goal of this study is to try and figure out patterns or trends that can lead up to UCL tears to try and prevent them in the future. Okay, so this study looked at 7 different pitches from pitchers all across the league that tore their UCL. They looked at a 4-seam fastball, a 2-seam fastball, changeups, curveballs, sliders, cutters, and sinkers. They used the last 15 outings from each pitcher to gather a trend. So whenever the pitcher tore their UCL, they went back the last 15 games that they threw. For starting pitchers, this is about half a season, so I feel like this is a good sample size to use. They would look at trends for each pitcher. Like I said, it's anything like velocity, the pitch amount for each pitch, or spin rate of each pitch. They're trying to look for decreases or increases in anything that could show a trend or figure out any patterns that could lead into that injury. What this study found was that essentially pitchers got worse over their last 15 starts. They found that in the velocity category, the fastball and the slider velocity was consistently down. They saw that the fastball had an average drop of 0.7 miles per hour, and the slider had an average drop of 0.5 miles per hour. In terms of spin rate, they saw that the fastball spin rate dropped, but for the cutter, they saw that the cutter spin rate increased, which I found really interesting. In terms of the percentage thrown, they found that curveballs were increased in the terms of percentage thrown of curveballs. This typically would coincide with the lack of trust in their fastball. If their fastball velocity is dropping, then they'll typically increase the amount of curveballs that they throw. I have a graphic here which basically just shows the charts of what they saw. So you see in chart A, that's the percentage of curveballs, so you'll see that consistently goes up over their 15 starts. Each dot, by the way, each dot is each start. So you'll see it'll have some where it'll start normal and then it'll raise and then it may drop, but overall it just goes up. Chart B is their fastball velocity, so you see that goes down. Typically after that 8th or 9th game, it'll have a major drop. You'll see chart number C, their 2-seam velocity follows a similar trend. It's just not as drastic as the 4-seam. Their slider velocity in graph number D, or graph letter D, you'll see that goes down the same sort of trajectory as the 2-seam and the 4-seam fastball. Their cutter spin rate is the one where you see that increases over time, though. So I find that interesting. I'm not sure exactly why that is, but that is really interesting. And then in graph F, you'll see the 4-seam spin rate that drops over time. It's not the same as the 4-seam velocity, but it's still pretty near the same. So in conclusion, there's many things that I can take away from both of these studies that were done. The first study that I chose shows that biomechanical stress can lead to issues in the elbow and the shoulder. Things like speed of elbow valgus, shoulder external rotation, and the timing of hip rotation, along with the knee flexion at foot impact, can lead to elbow stress. The second article shows that there's trends that you can use to look for it. So things like velocity drops, spin rate drops outside of pitches like the cutter, and the increased use of the curveball all show that an injury may be ready to happen. If you put the two articles together, there's things that you can use to kind of not only predict an injury, but kind of prevent it. So we know that a curveball can use excess elbow valgus than like a normal fastball. So one, if you're using that pitch more than normal, then it means that you're not relying on your fastball anymore, which means that that injury may be coming. But also if you're using that curveball more, that's going to put more stress on your elbow than normal, which can also lead to injury. Both articles are in agreement that fatigue is a big factor in this injury. So that could be anything where, like I said earlier, if you throw too many pitches the last outing, or you throw too many outings in a season, or you just have a bad off season, then that could lead to that injury. Article 2 notes that some of the biomechanics in the athletes change over time in those last 15 starts. So they may start looking one way, and then as that injury may progress, or it doesn't show up necessarily, but as their arm may start to hurt or things may show up, then their biomechanics can change or their form may change in their pitching.